This is the Vancouver meeting of the BC News chapter. Today is March 12th, 2016. And we are at the tipping point in the world between the collapse of the British system and the emergence of a new system. And that new system has been defined implicitly back in the 1780s, 1790s by Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States. Now, there's tremendous amount of disinformation and confusion about Hamilton. He's vilified, worshipped for the wrong reasons. It's very complex. But if you want to understand Hamilton, it's very simple. Read his three reports: the report on the subject of manufacturers, the report on banking, and the report on credit. And you won't have to deal with all of the spin doctors. So this Hamiltonian definition is what has emerged in China, is emerging in Russia, and is now other nations are trying to move in this direction as well. Now, Hamilton's ideas are not a blueprint per se, but a means around which the leaders of a nation or a group of nations can deliberate around how to create future economic development. And what I'm going to go through is, briefly, is some of the concepts that Hamilton introduced when he was the first Treasury Secretary, as he was coming in as the first Treasury Secretary under George Washington. And once you understand what Hamilton was introduced, then you know Karl Marx was not on the beam at all. Everything that Karl Marx attacked was already said by Hamilton, and all the mistakes that Marx made in his economic analysis were already corrected by Hamilton a good 80 years before Marx. So that you know. So now I'll start with the with the key concepts in Hamilton. But you can discover this on your own. Now, the first one is this concept of the development of manufacturers. Okay. And what he was saying, this concept is that you build factories to manufacture items which are consumed by the rich people. Luxury items? No. They are consumed by farmers. They are consumed by those building the infrastructure, and they are consumed by the building of the society. And the idea is that these manufacturers would improve the condition of agriculture such that the productivity of agriculture would increase, and that would free up the labor to become more involved in manufacturing. Okay, so this is one of the concepts. And the key to the development of manufacturers is two things. One is inventions and the science the basic science that allows for individuals, entrepreneurs, to create inventions. And then those inventions in turn are used throughout the society to improve the condition of the society. But without a capability to manufacture, you can't do it. You can't do this. And the key component of manufacturers, as later developed, is the machine tool sector. Because the machine tool sector is what connects the new designs to the new things that have to be produced. So the machine tools create the machines that create. And some of these ideas go back to Leonardo da Vinci. But now, if you increase agricultural production, how do you prevent the food from being spoiled? Because you have nowhere to send it. So this is where the question of creating a transportation infrastructure so the farmer can get the food and food can be available to some other farmers or to an urban population. So this is implied into this idea of the development of manufacturers is you have to develop the transportation infrastructure. Well, so initially those infrastructure are roads, then there's also canals, and a little later on is railways. But it's all centered around the development of manufacturers to produce all these things, which then expand the productive capability of the whole system, especially agriculture. And so this is a kind of a simplified explanation of this idea of manufacturers. Now, Adam Smith, who wrote something a little before this called The Wealth of Nations, attacked this idea. Adam Smith attacked the idea of manufacturers, saying that setting up manufacturers was a parasitizing of the surplus created by agriculture. And that was Adam Smith. And later on, Jefferson, who was the antagonist to Hamilton, and essentially most of the presidents that occurred after Jefferson as well were antagonists to Hamilton, except for
John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams. Up until Lincoln, they were mostly, to some degree or another, semi-antagonistic. Jefferson's idea was of an agricultural society, to a large degree based on slavery, slave plantations, and just itinerant farming, without the development of manufacturers. And Jefferson saw the development of manufacturers and the government that this creates as an oppression on the agrarian, on this agrarian. He saw it as an oppression, and he was opposed to it. But he was following pretty much the Adam Smith perspective. Unfortunately, this issue has not been resolved. It's still going on. It's been a seesaw battle inside the United States between these two different tendencies. That is why you never saw a development of Marxism much in the U.S., because the fight was never between capitalism or socialism. It was always between Hamilton and the Jefferson concept. Now, the second thing that Hamilton introduced is his concept of banking. Now, his concept of banking was radically different than what had existed prior to that. his idea of banking was that was based upon the idea of future wealth. That is, you give a loan to a farmer, and so the farmer can carry out the productive activity, and then the sale of the product essentially pays back the loan. And this is a very radical concept. It did not exist before this, as far as I know, and this is the development of I guess you could say commercial banking. It also, you have an entrepreneur who goes to a local bank and gets a loan to create a manufacturing facility, and so forth and so on. Also, you have this is the kind of concept of banking that he had. This may seem very simple, but it's not. This is not the concept of banking that we have today. His idea of banking is is for the development of, to allow the individuals in the society to have access to the means by which they can put their labor and their ingenuity and their ideas to work in a manner that they're not put in a position of having no way to do this for lack of credit, for lack of money. In other words, you don't have to have money. You can have skills, you can have a commitment, you can have a moral character, and that would be enough to justify a loan from a knowledgeable local banker. And and the idea is that these loans were not loans for servitude, but they were loans to increase the velocity of economic activity, increase the development of manufacturers, increase the physical economy. Okay. And and then he developed, within that context, the idea of a national bank. And the idea of a national bank would be that all of the taxes that the government raise goes into the national bank as deposits. All the revenues go into the national bank as deposits. The national bank then creates credit also for promoting with other institutions the main projects, like infrastructure projects, on which all of this depends. So the Erie Canal or the railway system or whatever, it would be a combination of the private sector and the national bank and bonds and so forth. But the idea was that this would be an expansion of the credit in the society. But this expansion of credit in the society would be connected to the expansion that the infrastructure was creating. So the fact that you have an increase of credit or money in the society is also occurring as you're also increasing the actual amount of economic activity. So it's not like you're creating an unpayable debt. If the government goes into debt to create credit, the net effect of the credit is creating a bigger tax base on which the debt is perfectly can be funded. Or you can do it without having the government go into debt. But the idea is to use debt as an instrument of credit. And so what he did was to take the national debt that was worthless and convert it into something that could be used as a means of credit. If you had a piece of national debt, you could use it to borrow money to carry out productive activity. Okay, so that's another concept. So that gets into the concept of credit. That's the third concept of credit, which is the third concept is okay. So now you have essentially all these things were fought. Like you had the Erie Canal being built between New York City and the Lake Erie. That canal opened the door for the development of the Great Lakes region, of everything, and turned New York City into a major port. Today you have the Chinese, which I'll get to, and I'll get to that in a minute. Now, you also have the public credit going to fund, and government expense going to fund scientific research. Lincoln, for instance, began to fight to fund agricultural colleges, where a lot of the revolution in agriculture began to take place. And also the space program today is a similar scientific project, which is not just basic research, it's a driver for then the private sector of machine tools and in the middle section of small firms pick up the innovations and then translate them into useful, new and useful and effective manufacturing. Now the other idea, the other concept is that you have to involve the population in the productive process. And you have to involve the creativity of the individuals in the productive process. So you have to have a banking system that provides credit to those individuals with the idea that they will figure out solutions in this whole process. And the whole system has to be set up in such a way, the national bank, as well as to prevent speculation, to prevent financiers from coming in and speculating on things such that they're making a profit on a speculative system. Now, today, after after being under British influence, and then the Civil War, and then under warlords, and then the Japanese invasion, and then the Civil War, and then Mao's ill-fated Cultural Revolution, the China that has emerged with a Hamiltonian outlook. And people ask, well, what is their plan? Their plan may be this or that, but as these plans don't work, their convergence is towards a Hamiltonian system of credit, a Hamiltonian system of economic development, a Hamiltonian system and they've done this partly through trial and error. Deng Xiaoping, when he came in, said that China has to put its massive amount of its investment in developing engineering and scientific education. That without those, developing a competent cadre of scientists and engineers, there would be no future for China, period. So they did that, and now they're emerging. And so the system they are moving towards, which is not being understood by people in the West, but it's being understood by the empire as a dire threat, is very similar. The Chinese want to build rail connectivity to connect up Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, all of Southeast Asia, ultimately North and South America through the Bering Strait Tunnel. And they want to do this for a reason. Because if you're going to develop manufacturers, if you don't have a place to develop, because you have no way to go there, you can't develop it. You can't do mining there. You can't do agriculture there. You can't do anything there. You got to have a way to get there. So if you do this, then you have a way of connecting up all these areas. Now you have a potential for making the investments in the development of those areas have some value. Now, this is very interesting. In Europe, the last vestige of the Hamiltonian system that Germany adopted after World War II to pull itself out of the destruction of Germany during World War II resided in something called the German savings banks. And their association has formed a partnership with the China Banking Association. And they signed a cooperation deal which is to benefit locally oriented commercial banks in China. China's objective is to develop what they call an innovative economy. Of course, that's the word for it. Or knowledge economy. That's their word for it. And the need for a commercial banking sector modeled on a Hamiltonian system has very few now models left in the world. And one of them is this German savings banks. And these are the savings banks that lend money to what the Germans call the Mittelstand, the machine tools, the productive Mittelstand. And the Mittelstand in Germany is what is making Germany still viable economically, whereas the rest of Europe has gutted all of this, and it's not viable economically at this point. But Germany is, because they've been able to preserve a large component of what they call the Mittelstand. And so they've had a hard time developing it, and the president of the German Savings Banks Association told Handelsblatt that China city banks were the basis of a commercial banking sector, but there were only 134 of them, with just 11% of the deposits in China's banking system. Whereas Germany had 400 of these banks, with the total deposits more than Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank combined. And okay, so this is where China's going. They want to set up an internal commercial banking system similar to what Hamilton was seeking to do in the United States, backed by a national bank, which could be the engine for unleashing the productive creativity of the Chinese, and also the savings that the Chinese have to put in these banks, which is in the trillions and trillions, so that they can put it to work. And in China, because the state-owned banks don't function in this way for many reasons. And so this is a direction that China is going in. And so now, an opposite process is going on right now in Europe around the European Central Bank's chairman, Mario Draghi. And what he's done is he's gone ahead and pushed through negative interest rates and quantitative easing in the form of 80 billion euros a month, like the Federal Reserve, and also buying up worthless financial instruments of the large banks. Now, this is devastating to these savings and loans, because they need to have some interest for the people who are putting funds in to be able to function. They need to have some interest, because the depositors are then told to leave, to pull their funds out of these savings banks, and which are giving a little bit of interest, and put them with the risky speculators. So this is an attempt to drain this deposit base in Germany, which is the last deposit base which is being used in a productive way out of that into the global casino. And this is going to be devastating, and this is triggering a massive resistance inside Germany to the central bank, to the European Central Bank, and to the policy that's coming down on Germany. But this is a policy that will break the ability of Germany to remain, at least to some degree, economically viable. Now, the gutting out of the industrial base of Europe, in Italy, in Britain, and in France has occurred to a large degree. In Germany, it has not fully occurred. And so this is what this system does. It drives the deposit base out of the productive part of the economy into the global casino. And that's how they keep the global casino going until the global casino collapses. And then, where is your production going to be coming from when the global casino collapses? And now you have a disintegration. How are you going to put back your productive apparatus? That's going to be the key issue. And now, in the United States, the last remaining productive apparatus in the United States is in the aerospace industry. The auto industry is pretty much stripped. It's in partly the defense industry, but it's also in the aerospace industry, and in this. And what we're trying to do is get across to people. What Obama did in trashing the space program, what Obama did in trashing NASA, was very destructive, because he took all these very highly skilled people, all these very highly developed people, and put them on the economic scrap heap. And these are the people you're going to need if you're going to revive the United States in a real physical economic way. You need those people. This is where you're going to get the scientific, in a revivalist-based program, this is where you're going to get your scientific potential to do what China is now starting to do, which is to move out of the labor-intensive production into much more advanced level of production, both internally, not just externally, but internally as well. And so this is where we are. Now, we are at a point now where this system is in the process of collapsing, and an international system of Hamiltonian economics is in the potential wings to replace this system. In Russia, you have a similar dialogue going on, and also in India, you have a similar dialogue going on. But it's the Chinese who have suffered immensely under other types of economic arrangements, who are moving in this direction and represent a new power that will promote this all over the world. Now, it's kind of not paradoxical that the last time something like this was going on a global scale against an imperial system was occurring in the period of the 1870s and 80s as an outgrowth of these same policies being adopted by Lincoln, and the industrial transformation of the United States during the Civil War was then promoted in the form of railway building by railway companies in the United States, promoted by the Lincoln crowd. And this was picked up in Russia and in Germany and in Japan. So you had the export of the Hamiltonian approach going on in the late 1800s, leading into the assassination of William McKinley, which then shifted the United States away from promoting Hamiltonian economics to being the partner of the empire. So that changed everything, the assassination of McKinley. But up until the assassination of McKinley, the United States was playing a role that now China is playing on a much bigger scale, and in a different context, at a different rate, speed. The speed of things changing is much faster. So now the lack of a Hamiltonian economic system, which was partly maintained up until the 1999 by Glass-Steagall. The repeal of Glass-Steagall and everything that followed that has been the dismantling of what was left of the reforms that FDR implemented, and this created the mess that we're in now in the United States, and to some degree also Canada. The two are connected. Now the political transformation that has gone on in the United States during this period, from about the time of Kennedy's assassination, and then later from the time of the 1980s reform of the banking system, and then what you've had is a transformation of the United States economically to a virtually complete post-industrial society, where the former working class skilled workers have been trashed. The new elite are these postmodernist intellectual academics and people that work in Wall Street, and they have total contempt for the population. And you're seeing a reaction in the population against the whole system. But because there has not been a clear alternative being proposed, because LaRouche went to prison and because of a lot of other factors, and I won't go into all the factors, what you have is this rebellion, so to speak, against the system, against what's been done. Is taking the form of a populist demagogue. Well, he's not quite fully a demagogue, but I'm talking about Donald Trump. And I'm also talking about another demagogue who's somewhat of a lesser figure, Bernie Sanders. Again, neither one of these is presenting a conception of how they're going to alter the economic situation so that the nation can begin to be productive again. In the case of Bernie Sanders, he is for reinstating Glass-Steagall. He says, and I don't doubt that he really would be in favor of that. But beyond that, he has no conception of how he's going to deliver the promises of a better life for the population. Because you cannot deliver a better life for the American population because their economy doesn't exist to create the better life. They have to radically change the economic policies. And by Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States. Now, there's tremendous amount of disinformation and confusion about Hamilton. He's vilified, worshipped for the wrong reasons. It's very complex. But if you want to understand Hamilton, it's very simple. Read his 3 reports: the report on the subject of manufacturers, the report on banking, and the report on credit. And you won't have to deal with all of the spin doctors. And what I'm going to go through is briefly some of the concepts that Hamilton introduced when he was the first Treasury Secretary, as he was coming in as the first Treasury Secretary under George Washington. And once you understand what Hamilton was introduced, then you know Karl Marx was not on the beam at all. Everything that Karl Marx attacked was already said by Hamilton, and all the mistakes that Marx made in his economic analysis were already corrected by Hamilton a good 80 years before Marx. So that you know, so now I'll start with the with the key concepts in Hamilton. But you can discover this on your own. Now, the first one is this concept of the development of manufacturers. Okay. And what he was saying, this concept is that you build factories to manufacture items. So this Hamiltonian definition is what has emerged in China, is emerging in Russia, and is now other nations are trying to move in this direction as well. Now, Hamilton's ideas are not a blueprint per se, but a means around which the leaders of a nation or a group of nations can deliberate around how to create future economic development. This is the Vancouver meeting of the BC Lewis chapter. Today is March 12th, 2016. And we are at the point, we are at the tipping point in the world between the collapse of the British system and the emergence of a new system. And that new system has been defined implicitly back in the 1780s, 1790s by